Hi guys, Glader here, and today I have a video about GladNet. GladNet, for the longest time, a very long time, has been my networking library of choice that I developed that I use in emulation projects such as the Phantasy Star Online client emulation project, as well as the World of Warcraft emulation project that you've seen over the years. It was in version 3 for a very long time, but I'm happy to announce that over the past few days, after working on the FreeCraft Core serializer, another incredible, important piece of tech that's used across Phantasy Star Online and WoW emulation stuff that I do, it was super successful. So I thought I'd try my hand on significantly improving the existing networking library that all these things really depend on. So it's basically a layer above the serializer. And initially, I'm focusing on something that's always been a weak point for GladNet, which was server emulation, or just server applications. It had a very strong ability to do client emulation, but there was really no good server API. There's no really good way to set up servers. You could, but it was a very weak feature of the library. And I'm happy to say that I'm focusing on this initially because, well, for reasons I haven't yet announced, but they're Phantasy Star Online related, so for people who are interested in Phantasy Star Online stuff, you might be interested in what's coming up. So I'm going to go do some, a little example. I'm going to show you some of the API in GladNet4. I have basically the Hello World application of server applications where you have an Echo server. So I'm going to show you how you can actually set up a TCP server with GladNet4. It's quite easy, as you can see. The program, just a few lines in the program. You need an endpoint. You need a logger. That's about it. Common logging is pretty common library in .NET, so boom, we've got our application, and then you can just begin listening. Quite simple. So let's go ahead and enter into this type and see what's going on here. The naming for these things are going to change, and they need to change. But as you can see right here, very simple. We just call the base constructor, and then we have to override these abstract methods. We have some validation to indicate if socket's acceptable. Very basic stuff. Is not fancy. And then we have something that's called create, which is supposed to create a session when someone connects. So this is a high-level object that represents a network session. So you've got something on the server and, a remote peer or a client or something, a remote connection. And this is the high-level object that is representing this. And you must provide it some stuff such as a serializer so it can understand the messages coming in, as well as basically a context of services it needs to build these messages and read these messages, stuff like this. Very simple. And in fact, I'll show you some of these. So to actually read messages, you need to basically be able to create packet headers and read packet headers and serialize messages of a specific type. As you can see, we're doing simple strings, and we have a simple packet header that is just a 2-byte size. So basically, if you can implement these interfaces, you are then able to supply the dependencies required to the session. And then you just create the session. Let's take a look at what a session looks like. Session supports different protocols, but in this case TCP, you just inherit from TCP managed session, and you supply it with some generic arguments to indicate the message types you'd like to receive. We're receiving strings because it's just an echo client. And then you have one function, which is overridable, and it's abstract, so you have to implement it, but it basically receives the message. Now, normally you don't handle a message in place. You want to have something more robust, but for the example here, we just handle the message in place, we log it, and we echo it back. As you can see, we access a property on the managed session, which is the message service, message interface, and we send the message. This will send it and echo it back to the client. And as you can see, this is not very much code. In fact, you can see the whole Echo server project. It's just implementing the packet header and serializer interfaces so that GladNet can know what kind of stuff you want to send and how you send it, deriving from the application base type, and basically configuring a session object. So just create the session, then you're golden. Everything else is taken care of for you. Very complicated stuff behind the scenes, but it's all done for you. And in fact, if we run this, it should start up. And I got a little test application here. We run this. It'll send some goods every time we hit the enter button. And you can see it happening on both screens. Congratulations, it's the hello world of server applications. Very cool. And if you disconnect, you get a graceful disconnect. Sweet. So, I'm quite happy with the APIs. There's definitely API change in GladNet 3 versus GladNet 4, but they're for the better. You can see it's incredibly simple. I can't think of a simpler way to create a high quality server application for free. You know, just raw TCP. You can use the built-in TCP libraries and stuff, but there's a lot of stuff you need to consider. And then you don't have this like awesome support for like messaging. So these obviously don't have to be strings. These could be polymorphic message types. So you might have a message type. Maybe it's JSON. Maybe it's protobuf. Maybe it's some custom binary protocol. And you can implement these and receive these messages as high-level objects, or as objects instead of raw binary. And you don't really have to interact with that. You just implement the serializers, interfaces, and then you implement the packet headers, and boom, you're receiving messages. It's quite cool. And if you're interested in some of the behind the scenes, so this uses the .NET TCP server implementation of GladNet4. And there's two important things that you need to worry about. You need to implement the protocol's base application, which is subject to refactoring, as it definitely needs a few things refactored. But to go through it, it's quite simple. You don't have to worry about this as a consumer of the library, and that's what's great about it. You can just use this. It basically does some very boring and annoying socket management and manages behind the scenes, like creating what's required to make the session. And that's cool. So then we have the base TCP session, and this is really just depending on how you want to build the session, how you want to represent the session networking. For example, you have a socket connection here. We just have some very basic writing and reading interfaces that, or not interfaces, methods that actually dispatch to sometimes some of the services that are injected into the client. And sometimes they call it base implementation. For example, if you take a look at this isn't dependent on TCP, but this in fact is a base implementation, which just reads a message from the message interface and dispatches it. So in fact, the writing could probably do the same. I just have not refactored it. Overriding these, basically the only purpose is to implement a specialized connection, try-catch, and finally stuff, which is pretty important for the new pipeline API in .NET, but quite simple. Needs a little bit of refactoring, but quite simple. So what's not simple, and this is the stuff that you don't have to write every single time, which is why I've always loved GladNet, the low level, well, I shouldn't say low level because it's .NET, it's quite high level. The low level networking. In this case, we're using the new Pipelines API, which is great, highly efficient, but you've got all this code that's just reading buffers, reading and deserializing and moving buffers around and slicing things and copying, in some cases, some buffers somewhere, and managing the socket and doing all this like stuff that you don't want to do every single time. You wouldn't want to write, I mean, it's only 300 lines of code, but you don't want to write this every single time. It's quite difficult to write this, but it's quite easy to write this stuff. You just create a server application. And obviously there's great frameworks for this already, such as ASP Core, but they target web, and most things that you find will target web, or they'll target a very specific protocol. And they might be closed source or whatever, and you just can't really use them for emulation. And GladNet's always been about emulation. So I'm really happy with this. I'm really happy to apply it to some upcoming stuff, and I think the API came out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. Needs improvement, but not too bad. Thanks for watching this long and technical video, guys. I hope to announce some PSO stuff soon. I feel like I've said that a million times over the years, but this time we're gonna do it again. I'll see you in the next video, though. Thanks for watching.